MOvember, day 7, and this video I'm going to do on some work out of Facing the Shadow and Facing Addiction by Patrick Carnes, and Facing Addiction also had the contributing authors of Stephanie Carnes and John Bailey. In the first section of this book, and it's the first task of Patrick's 30-point plan, is this breaking through delusion and denial. And he's asking what is real and this recognizing of self-delusion, because addicts, as part of a criteria of addiction, have denial as an aspect. And so we have a disease that tells us that we don't have it. And so in this very first chapter, Patrick comes out and starts to talk about what is addiction and where did this reality distortion start. So let me take you through some of the key elements. I'll read a little, do a bit of Prezi videoing, and we'll get some content here on trying to break through this denial and delusion. Mental health is a commitment to reality at all costs. This is a quote by M. Scott Peck, who wrote A Road Less Traveled and People of the Line. You'll find it on the meadows in Arizona. It's on their walls, and it's in Patrick's literature for a very good reason. We have to break through the opposite of this. He says that if mental health is a commitment to reality at all costs, then addiction has to be a commitment to medicating and distorting that reality. So let's go through and discuss it. Addiction is an illness of escape. Its goal is to obliterate, medicate, or ignore reality. And I'll do some reading here. It is an alternative to letting oneself feel hurt, betrayal, worry, and most painful of all, loneliness. The hardest challenge for some addicts is acknowledging that they have a problem. Addiction cripples the core ability to know what is real, our most essential skill. And if you've ever worked with addicts or been caring for or love or the parent of an addict, you see this inability to know what is real. They say some crazy stuff and they really believe it. And when Patrick says it's our most essential skill and we don't have it, it makes a lot of sense when you deal with addiction. Because addicts weave a string of rationalizations and delusions that make it impossible to cope with details like jobs and families. A lot of what addicts are running away from is everyday life. In this chapter, we will look at why denial holds such a strong sway over addicts and what to do to counter it. We will define addiction and who is likely to become an addict. And he goes on to talk about that. Addiction often begins simply, reality becomes too much to bear. So we try to escape through drugs and alcohol or sex or food or fill in the blank, whatever you're here to looking at this for. Escaping reality for even the briefest time brings some relief. But when escaping becomes habitual, we have a mental health illness known as addiction. If mental health can be defined, as author M. Scott Peck says, as a commitment to reality no matter what the cost, addiction can be defined as its most direct opposite, evading reality no matter what the cost, though it may even bring death. So, reality distortion starts within the family. Alcoholics and drug addicts, sex addicts, food addicts, fill in the blank, typically come from families in which addiction is already present. Often family members, parents, grandparents, siblings, or extended family struggle with alcoholism, compulsive gambling, nicotine addiction, eating problems, illicit drug use, or compulsive sex. Even more likely, those family members battle with a combination of addictions. Carnes, in his book Gentle Path Through the 12 Steps, for any of you folks looking for an alternative to do your step work, in their research, they identified 87% of people with one addiction have two or more. So if you've been to a treatment center like South Park or in the Meadows where you walk in with one and come out with five, it's not a marketing campaign. It's just that they're really good at helping you find all the ways that you might be obliterating, medicating, and ignoring reality. So, as children, addicts often grow up in an environment where there is a classic elephant in the living room syndrome. Everyone pretends there is no problem, although there is a huge issue interfering with everyone's lives. In such a situation, children learn very early to look for addiction and not see it. So people who are addicted to drugs or alcohol tend to come from families that are either rigid or chaotic. So I'll just move through to these rigid or authoritarian families. In rigid authoritarian families, all issues and problems are black and white. There is no way to do. There is only one way to do something. They are too strict and have too much discipline, too many unbendable rules, and too many expectations for perfection. At the opposite end of the continuum are chaotic families. These families lack rules and discipline. Nothing is predictable. People's minds and expectations are constantly changing. 1 minute a parent may be acting like a parent, and the next minute they may be acting like a child. Now, the next family is in chaotic families, there is not enough stability, and in rigid families, there is not enough flexibility. Success in a rigid family means doing what the parents want to such an extent that children give up being who they are. In chaotic families, expectations change so much that children become confused about who they are. Normal child development does not happen, and by the time children enter adolescence, they have few options. Children may try to be perfect or may become rebellious. Both result in a distrust of authority and a poor sense of self, and both positions distort reality. And this little piece I'm about to read next, I found it so helpful and instructive in why do addicts find it so hard to ask for help, because it seems like they're on fire but they won't ask you to put the hose on them. One essential way that people check reality is to share with others and find out their perception of a situation. This requires a capacity for intimacy. Many addicts, however, come from families in which members are disengaged from one another, and at the other extreme they are enmeshed. So you've got this disengaged, enmeshed duality. In either case, children do not develop a capacity for healthy intimacy, and this becomes critical in this next piece. In disengaged families, there is little sharing, so children develop few skills about sharing, and I've tried to put some of these up here. So they have few skills about sharing who they are with others. They have trouble being vulnerable or risking anything. There's a typo. I ain't changing it. I'm not going back 7 minutes in. So being vulnerable and risking anything about themselves. Dyslexics of the world untie. So they will not be able to let something vulnerable out to others. The further result is that self-delusion then becomes hard to break, and that secrets become more potent than reality. So this is the secret world of addicts. We're sitting right in front of you. You're asking them what's wrong. They're telling you nothing. You know there's something wrong. You keep pressing and they keep pulling further back into the cave, right? So self-delusion becomes hard to break. Just getting the words out is hard. And secrets then become more potent than reality, resulting in the worst effect, that children are unable to ask for help. So if you're working with addicts and it's hard to find compassion because of the dishonesty, this is one of the ways into a compassionate response, because they're simply unable to ask for help even though they're on fire. So let me read on. The next one's enmeshed families. In enmeshed families, children learn to focus on meeting the needs of others at their own expense. And this is for any of you people out there that are codependent or really relate to the fawn response as a trauma response. This one's for you. Family members are very dependent on each other, and there is no sense of boundaries between themselves and others. Thus, they do not develop a strong sense of self. Stay with me on this. I'm learning to use Prezi and do these presentations for MOvember. So they have no sense of boundaries, and that they do not develop this strong sense of self. They are not capable of honest sharing because they do not have a core of self to share with others. And if you just sit with that for a second, this is, again, helping you to be compassionate towards addicts, that you sort of think, why can't you just tell me what's going on? And it's like, well, there's no sense of self, core of self. When you've grown up in an enmeshed family, there's no boundaries. You end up enmeshed. If you think, I think, if you feel, I feel, it's this reactive way of living, it's too much. So walls have to go up to keep you safe, because the parent who was meant to sort of be beside you and put a boundary over you and help you have some sort of containment by containing themselves, that's not happened. They've actually needed you to look after them, and as a result, there's no boundaries. So just to repeat that they don't have a sense of boundaries, and therefore they don't develop a sense of self, and as a result of that, there's no honest sharing. I can't share with you who I am because I don't have a core sense of self to share with others. The intimacy or closeness they feel is a false intimacy. It is closeness built on dishonesty, even if that dishonesty is with themselves. So the next thing that we look at here is that for people that have experienced any sort of trauma and abuse, and look, there's so much written on trauma and abuse these days, but I suppose I'll simply say this is between overt and covert. It is between a less than nurturing experience right up to really grotesque abuse of children. So let me just read through this and I'll try and click my way through. Addicts are also likely to have experienced trauma and abuse as children. Abuse and neglect do a few things. One is that it deepens a distrust in others and further distorts reality. Children who are neglected conclude they're not valuable, and in addition, they live with a higher level of anxiety because no one teaches them common life skills or provides for their basic needs. So children find ways to deaden the anxiety they inevitably feel. I really loved the work of John Breer. He was a guest speaker at one of the ITAP, Patrick Carnes Foundation's symposiums. Loved him. He just turned up with a 3-day growth and a Hawaiian shirt and a pair of chinos. He's from the Southern California University, and he's done a lot of incredible work on the effects of trauma. And he looks at all addictions as distress reduction behaviors: skin picking, hair pulling, cutting, and all of the things I'm addressing here. And so this is where Carnes would link in there and just say children find ways to deaden the anxiety they inevitably feel in these situations. They may encounter drugs at an early age and embrace those drugs when they discover the drugs calm their anxiety. Other forms of physical or sexual abuse intensify poor self-esteem and the need for relief from the fear. So there's a lot going on here. Abuse victims tend to distort reality. They can overreact or under-respond to life problems. So if you've known someone with complex PTSD from childhood trauma, you see this all the time. I know in my own life, I don't know what my kids think of me other than maybe I'm Super Mario in disguise, but they certainly see this overreaction or underreaction. Give me a big drama, I can sort of sail through some of those. Give me, the coffee milk frother doesn't work. This is an emergency, right? So you will certainly see this in folks. Being so terrified makes them reactive. Further, they compartmentalize, meaning they learn to split reality. This is a big part of addictive life, especially sex addiction. It's what really causes a lot of betrayal trauma, is when the secret life of the addict spills out of that secret compartment, and it just shatters the world of the family system and the betrayed partner. Let me find my place here. Yes, so further they compartmentalize, meaning that they learn to split reality, acknowledging parts of their life, but disallowing or denying problem areas. That may mean acting a certain way in one context and a totally different way in another. They may pretend a part of their life, such as a dead sibling or a family member who is in prison, does not exist. Now, Robert Louis Stevenson, he wrote about this in Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde. That personified, Robbie Louis Stevenson wrote about compartmentalization when he described Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde. Hyde personified the monster underneath the normal exterior of Dr. Jekyll. He was essentially describing the phenomenon of alcoholism, but you can use this for any form of addiction. So to just conclude, the final characteristic of abuse victims is that they tend to distort or minimize the impact of abuse. It wasn't that bad, or it did not hurt that much. This adds yet another layer of reality distortion. So addicts have so much experience in distorting reality that generally they become comfortable with it and minimizing the effects of the trauma. So when you're working with addiction, and there's a second typo, certainly not going back to fix that. What is it? Perfect imperfection. That can also be hard. I know when I worked at South Pacific and I was taught in Pia Melody's model, and it wasn't uncommon for someone to come in and they had the most horrific trauma story, and they do a trauma egg and they present it to the group. Everyone else was crying, including me, and they were sort of thinking, look, it wasn't that bad, and so minimizing the effects of the trauma just really adds to this ability to distort reality. So if you've got a distress reduction behavior like addiction on top of that, then before you know it, wow, you could be looking at their life and they just normalize it. They'll normalize extremes. They'll be saying things that you sort of think are really just obscure, but for them it's reality. So when we watch this and when we see it, learning to have a compassionate heart can sometimes be about knowing where it came from. And recovery in the beginning is about trying to break through this denial and see things as clear as we possibly can. So that's just the opening chapter in these books by Patrick. These are the most sold books I have. I usually have them in my bookstore, and I really love Patrick Carnes. He's been an incredible mentor from afar for me. And please look him up if you've related to any of this material. So this is a makeup video for MOvember. I hope it's been useful. Please pass it on to people you think might get something of it. The MOvember campaign has got all the videos I'm putting up all 30 days as November, so there'll be 30 videos in total. And there's a couple of workshops coming up, so please check out the page. Be gentle with your heart. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.